All right, so I'm Diana Sorobey, and I have been teaching for about 15 years now. And for the last half of my career, I've been teaching English as an additional language um, in Ho Chi Minh City at a couple of different international schools. And the students I work with typically aren't beginners in English. Usually they need some refinement with their grammar and they need more precise vocabulary. And I've noticed, as I imagine many of you have, that some students join our program and they quickly soar. They attain the high academic language goals that we set for them. They use the feedback that we provide. They self-monitor and they make rapid progress. And then there are other students who stay kind of stuck in this zone of mediocre language level and become long-term English learners, leaving them and their parents often quite frustrated. I've been working on my master's, and there have been a couple courses that I've taken in this program that have helped me understand that usually there's one of two reasons that students can stay at this kind of long-term plateau. The first is motivation. And this sometimes becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy as the students tend to, if they reach this level where they're not feeling successful, they can check out. And the second reason could be there's something else going on, possibly a learning difficulty. Both present challenges for us as educators, and both are things, though, that we can use strategies to push our students past these plateaus. So that's going to be the goal of this presentation. I'm going to share some of the strategies and tips that I've learned along the way to help students get past those plateaus. So I had the opportunity earlier this year, I think back in February, to attend another virtual conference. And the keynote was Dr. Catlin Tucker. And I found her presentation quite helpful, and I thought it was relevant to this presentation. So one of the questions she asked resonated with me. Are we really taking time as educators to understand our students so that we can design meaningful learning experiences? And she used the analogy that teachers are architects of learning. And I thought that was quite apt, because an architect needs to know their clients, they need to know the environment that they're building this structure for, and they really need to understand a lot of different variables, as we do for a lot of our different clients, if you will, our students, right? So this is something that I've set out to do better this particular academic year, and can boil it down to essentially two things to help those long-term English learners get unstuck. Two foundations really are to build relationships with them and to help them self-regulate. I'm going to share some resources that I use, and I noticed that we have teachers from all divisions represented here, and that's awesome. I'm going to share some templates in the chat with you just so that you can see what I've used this year. By no means are these perfect, and they're view only. The links aren't going in. Okay, give me a sec and I'll copy those links in so you guys can refer to them as we go along. And hopefully this will kind of contextualize and you can use these in your own. So the first is a presentation about mastery goals. I want my students to understand that setting goals shouldn't be about setting a goal to earn an A or setting a goal to exit EAL. It needs to be about the skills. Next is a goal setting template. It's just a Google Doc that I've used. It's more high school in terms of the way it's structured, but definitely can be adapted and gives you an idea. And the third is just a template that I've used to have my students journal. So as we go along, feel free to check those out. Let me get back into the slideshow. Okay, so I have them start at the beginning of each semester by setting some language goals after going through what mastery of skills goals should look like with the students. So I'll walk them through a presentation saying we should set a goal to be able to write with more precise vocabulary or speak for 5 minutes in front of their peers. They need to set those performance goals rather than I want to get an A. We have lots of conversations, and it's important for me to keep a reference somewhere of what my individual students' goals are. They also need a lot of feedback from me and a lot of tools from me as a teacher to work toward those goals. So, as I mentioned, having them focus on mastery of a particular skill is the first step. So instead of aiming for a win, like if we're having a debate, I don't want them to aim to win the debate. I want them to aim to be able to speak using persuasive strategies, use more precise vocabulary, even just to come up with a confident rebuttal, even if their opponent has a stronger one. Our kids need to have the confidence to be able to express themselves. So I have them first orient on mastery of a particular skill. And then we try to foster self-regulation. So I want you to take a look at this quote and think of students that you are currently working with who have this whole package kind of working for them already. So they set good goals, they implement effective learning strategies, they monitor and assess their progress, they establish a productive environment for learning, they seek assistance, they put in the effort. Think of a kid or a group of kids that demonstrate this. And now I want you to think of the opposite. A student or group of students that you currently work with who are missing one or more of these pieces of good self-regulation. The ones who have it already, they're working toward those goals. At this point in the school year, I'm sure you're thinking of those students and thinking they've got it together. They're going to advance and progress at the level expected or faster. It's the others who need our help to develop these skills. So we need to put in some scaffolding. The first place to start in my mind is to understand their motivation. So it's really important to have those one-on-one conversations. As students are working on a task, go around the room. Being at the door when they come into the classroom and just having a conversation about what did they do over the holiday, over the weekend, yesterday? Did they have an important sports game to them? What is it that they care about? Because if we understand that, then when we have conversations with them, we'll understand what's going on and help move them toward those goals. So these are some takeaways from my studies that have an impact on student self-regulation. So to get them to put those strategies in place, we want them to be able to set realistic goals, attainable goals, because if they set a goal that's too lofty, then their chance of success is lower. And if they can't feel that success, their motivation is going to decline. So we really have to know our students, know their abilities, and know what the targets that are realistic for them are. and help propel them toward little steps toward that goal. It's incredibly satisfying, even for me as an adult, to be able to tick things off a list. So if I've accomplished one small step, then I've got this feeling of satisfaction. We have to help our students. If they have this big goal to be able to write an academic essay, let's say, and use literary analysis and embed quotations skillfully and all these things, we have to help them one by one from where they currently are to where they want to be. We have to help them understand what those steps are and provide them with the tools that are needed. So in an elementary or middle school context, we can think of a different kind of task. And that's where we as educators need to really plan effectively and have that end goal in sight as we move our students forward in this and help break it down. And this is why collaboration is helpful, because it's a big task to do with many students. So I start with that goal setting template, and I have my students really set their sights each semester on one important goal. So for some, it's a writing goal. For others, it's a speaking goal. Others want to improve their reading proficiency. But hopefully they've got some specific feedback from teachers and from self-assessment that helps them find that starting point. Then we help them kind of chunk those goals toward the big goal. We break it down into attainable steps. And we help them celebrate the successes that they have made along the way. We can review these goals. So one of the tools I shared with you was a journal. I find it hard to get to every single student all the time as they're working independently. So to get them to have a conference with the teacher every time is unrealistic. Often I have them do reflection in these journals. They're not something that I assess for a grade. They're just a way that I can give the students some practice with writing, as well as gain some insight about what they're thinking and how they're reflecting on their progress toward their goals. But of course, there can be barriers to their motivation. I mean, even as we were coming in, we're talking about stressful situations for us as adults. I think the fact that we're having this conference this year virtually speaks volumes to the stresses and also the resilience that we've all had to foster, including our students. Nobody aims to drag the learning process out longer than it needs to be. All the students in our classes are there because they or their families want them to progress. But if they're not, it could be that there are stressors that are getting in the way. So one of the things I learned as a self-reflection too this year was that if we are under extreme stress, then we're not going to be able to learn in the same way. So students who are not feeling comfortable, secure, if they're in this sort of red brain reaction because, you know, life's been turned upside down. They're not in the classroom. They've been told to go to virtual school. Somebody in the family is sick. There's a whole host of reasons that might be interfering with their learning. Then their motivation is not going to be there for school-related subjects. And this is where we have to know them as humans and understand what's going on. So building connections, even though, especially in high school, we have these lofty curricular goals, if our students don't know one another, they don't know us well, they're not going to let us know when they're not functioning at the best of themselves. Dr. Stuart Shanker is someone who's put a lot of research into these sort of self-regulation strategies. This website is fantastic. It's called the Merit Center, and they have so many resources, and they have a lot of checklists and things about the classroom environment and how to minimize stressors in the classroom environment. For some students, it can be something as simple as, you know, the room is too cold or it's too hot, or little things. If there are a lot of sources of discomfort for our kids, then they're going to inhibit the learning progress. We have to think about all of those types of things and really know our kids and know when they're having an off day or an off week or an off month. So this is another one of those resources that was shared from another person who works with Shanker at the Merit Center. And in order for us to support good learner self-regulation, here are some things that we can do as teachers. We can clarify what good performance is. I love exemplars. I think those are one of the best ways for kids to understand what the target is. Because if they continually over the long term are looking and saying, but I'm doing these things, I'm doing okay, I can write a paragraph, I can write, but it's what's the difference between where you are and what our goal is for these exit criteria or for mastery of what you're looking at. Have students be able to self-assess, and this is tricky, especially if they don't have that mastery yet. They do need a lot of specific descriptive feedback. Collaboration with several teachers is always helpful, but really being the cheerleader of these kids and finding something that they're successful at, celebrating when they reach those little sub goals toward the big things. And our goal is to be their coaches and help them close that gap. I'm gonna come to this first. Hi, Sean. I think one of the most powerful things that, as I've gained more experience as an educator, I'm not afraid to have those challenging conversations with my students. And I think this has been one of the biggest successes. So if you notice that a kid has plateaued and that their language level is stuck in one domain or across the board, having a conversation with them is one of the most powerful things you can do. Of course, do it privately. Don't call them out in front of the rest of the class and point out the deficiencies, but a 3-minute conversation. Hey, I notice, you know, that there's been a bit of a dip. You were doing really well for a while and things have tapered off. What's going on? Just that simple question, what's going on, in a private, safe space, if you've built up the relationship with that student, can be so powerful. And this year in particular, I've had a few of those because my students have gone through a bit more of a roller coaster than normal with all of the restrictions that we've faced. Sometimes also involving parents in those conversations has a lot of power. We had a 9th grader this year, a girl who was particularly frozen with shyness. And in 9th grade in our school, they go through a debate unit. And having this girl even just state her position in this debate sent her to tears. And that was when I decided to call a parent conversation. And it doesn't always work this way, but I can tell you that in this case, it has been a complete turnaround. After a 15-minute parent meeting with the English teacher, myself, the student, and her father was so supportive, and she's now starting to take language risks. But if we hadn't called that meeting, hadn't taken that conversation on, she might still just be hiding behind her shyness. So it's really important to name what you observe and have the conversation with your students. sorry, I know I'm talking a lot. In your feedback, be as specific as you can and focus on 1 or 2 small goals at a time. If a student is making 7 different types of grammatical mistakes, they're not going to fix them all at once. Pick one, focus on that, celebrate when you see improvement, and then move on to the next one. And self-talk is really important. It's important that we don't accept our students' excuses, but of course that we're conscious and sensitive to their experience as people. So if they say they can't do something, or no, I'm not good at this, then be open to what can we do to get there? You're just not there yet. That growth mindset is important. So as I've worked student individual mastery goals into my practice more this year, and I hope to do more even next year, I've noticed that students are more engaged and invested in their learning and the reasons why we do particular work. They're more aware of productive and destructive behaviors that either lead towards success in their goals or hinder their progress. And they're getting more independent at finding ways to motivate themselves and apply consequences and more effective study strategies. And it could be a coincidence, but we've had a really difficult year with disruption and delay to the amount of instruction we've been able to do. And I'm exiting more EAL students than in previous years this year. And I attribute a lot of it to these conversations and the reflection that I'm building into my practice. So I know I talked a lot. I would love to invite some of your questions now, or if you have kind of individual students that you're thinking, or students that you'd like to help propel past these long-term plateaus, maybe we can put our heads together and brainstorm some strategies for them. So that's all I wanted to share. Do you guys have any questions? Wait. Just gonna check the chat. Yeah. Understood. Okay, so list of goals that would be good for elementary students. I think here's a good point to start with. Goals that would be good for your students, I think, need to come from the learning goals that you set in your unit plans with your co-teachers, thinking about what the goals are and the big assessments are in the curriculum, and then reflecting on what students have struggled with in the past. You know the learners at your school, and you know the patterns. For my students, it tends to be more like analytical writing or speaking with confidence, speaking more frequently in class. Okay, and Christy's asking about the chart in the journal. Okay, so is that you mean the error graphing chart, right?
Yes, that's the one.
Okay, so what I do with my journals, and you can see in that first page, is I give my students feedback in the format of a color code. So instead of circling something and saying this is a subject verb agreement error, when I'm giving feedback, it's been digital, so I just use the highlight function in Google Docs most often. And they know that a green highlight means it's a verb tense issue. A pink highlight means they've forgotten a plural. Yellow, it's subject verb agreement. And so that they can go and self-correct it. But they can also see then if there's a bunch of yellow on the page, that's the one area. So that's my way of giving specific feedback. Thank you for your question, Christy, because I feel like that helps them spot the patterns that they need to focus on.
How often do you give that feedback?
It varies depending on what we're working towards and what they're doing in their other classes. But I would say over the course of the year, I aim for like 15 journal entries. And then whenever they do any piece of writing that I look at, I follow that same pattern. And so by this point in the year, they're conditioned and they understand it. And they've learned how to graph in science classes, so they can apply that learning. And then we're also talking science, vocabulary, dependent, independent variable, where does it go, what axis, and they're able to take that feedback and graph it using what they've learned in science, and they can actually analyze the data and hopefully see that their error patterns with particular skill are going down. Thanks. Yeah, Carrie, I'm sorry. I realize I should have thought of specific questions, and I was just kind of focused on my findings and not making it as interactive as I should have. All
No,
right.
I just feel like in elementary, I've tried to have those really, you know, those private conversations. How's it going? And I just feel like a lot of the students who, and these aren't beginners, right? These are kids who've been receiving support for a while. They aren't really sure what to say. So I feel like I must be probing with the wrong questions, right? They just kind of say, I don't know.
I do jot down questions before I have the conferences, and the questions are geared usually toward the task and the observations that I've made. So let's say I listened to them deliver a speech. Every kid did a 5-minute speech, and perhaps I noticed that a lot of them weren't using transition phrases like however, therefore, or they weren't using the right one in the right place. That might be a question I ask every kid as I'm going around in the conference. Did you use transition phrases effectively? But I might have had a talk with the whole class about what that looks like using an exemplar. So I think the exemplar would be the key piece there, right? You want to show them what mastery of that skill looks like. And then you want to take and have a discussion about patterns you're seeing within the group with the group before you go around and have those conversations. I find the feedback piece takes a lot of time, but you need to make it individualized to each task. Thanks for your questions. Does anyone have any other questions? I think we're at time otherwise.
I've just got one, Diana.
Sure.
I was just wondering how many students you're working with at the moment. How many specific goals how many students have you got on your plate at the moment?
I have about 14 in 3 different classes. So
okay, 45.
Just over 40.
Yeah.
So it is a reasonable number of kids to get to know. When we're dealing with larger numbers, this becomes more difficult, and we just have to get better with our record keeping. Like I think, like I said, just keeping a quick reference, having a class roster, and even just handwriting, like, okay, so-and-so Daniel is working on making fewer subject verb agreement errors, while Min wants to improve his reading comprehension. Those sorts of things, having a quick reference. And that's my goal next year, is to somehow get the kids to create a visual so that it appears in the classroom and they've got their eye on it. But I'd love your ideas on how to do that.
That sounds good. Giving them the ownership, empowering them is the way to go, isn't it? I don't know, maybe a suggestion, maybe get 2 or 3 students who could then lead that as a project and see if they can then go around getting feedback from students.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. That's a good idea. All right. Well, thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today. And I'll let you go. And our next session starts in 15 minutes, right, Tony?
15 minutes. Yeah.
So
11
go
o'clock.
take a break, have a drink of water or whatever you need. Thanks.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you.